I observed in the lower third of the neck a small, rounded, well-demarcated entrance wound. This was obliterated by the tracheostomy in that Dr. Perry made the tracheostomy incision through the entrance wound. Different parts of the tissues were spread. He then made the incision into the trachea, and through the hole that had previously been made by the entrance of the bullet, the tracheostomy was put in place.
Radio reports from Dallas that afternoon mentioned the small round wound of entry in the front of the president's neck. They were heard by the late Dr. Robert Livingston, who was then scientific director of the National Institute for Mental Health.
The reports had been that the president had been shot from the rear from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. And the evidence at hand from the Parkland Hospital doctors of a small, neat wound in the neck was contradictory to that, or at least complementary to that, in the sense that it required that there be a shot from in front, so that if he were shot from the rear, he was also being shot at the same time from in front. So I wanted to tell whoever was going to do the autopsy about that, and so I telephoned Bethesda Naval Hospital. The officer of the day I knew, and he put me quickly through to Dr. James Humes, who was going to head the autopsy team. He was very cordial, and we had a good conversation, brief. He had not heard about the neck wound. I told him that it was important because it was a wound of entrance, and I told him that it should be explored completely for its track and to find any bullet or fragments of bullets that would remain, and particularly emphasized that it had to be a frontal wound since there was no tearing of the tissues. He left the telephone momentarily and came back and said, "Dr. Livingston, I'm sorry I can't continue this conversation. The FBI won't let me."
Humes later claimed he only learnt about that bullet wound after the autopsy from one of the Dallas doctors. He never examined it.
I'm absolutely certain about that telephone call. I'm sure that Dr. Humes got a clear impression from me about the neck wound representing a wound of entrance.
Further corroboration of a shot fired from in front of Kennedy's car came from the late Dr. Evalia Glanges in her only filmed interview. She was no stranger to guns.
I've been handling guns since I was a child. Couldn't even hold the gun. I had to put it on the fence in order to shoot it. Paul! On the morning of November the 22nd, 1963, I was a second-year medical student at Southwestern Medical University in Dallas, Texas. We ran around the side of the building to the emergency room exit, and the presidential limousine was there. Had been standing there for some time just watching the back of the emergency room when I realized that there was a bullet hole in the windshield. Talked to my friend next to me and said, "Look, there's a bullet hole in the windshield," and pointed it out to them. At the time, I did not know any of the details of the shooting. I was quite shocked when I looked up and saw the bullet hole, but it was very clear. It was a through and through bullet hole through the windshield of the car from the front to the back. I don't believe there's even any cracks associated with that bullet hole. It seemed like a high velocity bullet that had penetrated from front to back in that glass pane. At which point a security officer of some type raced forward and jumped in the limousine and drove it off even as I was leaning against it to an area back of us somewhere. And that was the last time I saw the limousine.
The Secret Service made certain no authority in Dallas had an opportunity to examine the bullet damage to Kennedy's car.
The Secret Service also usurped Dallas authority and removed the Kennedy limousine from Parkland Hospital and flew that limousine back to Washington, D.C.
For over a decade, researcher Doug Weldon, a professor of criminal justice and an attorney, has studied Kennedy's limousine and what happened to it in the hours after the assassination.
Just as the president's body in an autopsy could have given us many answers, a thorough study of that limousine at that time without evidence being tampered with would also have given us many important answers as to what really happened.
But on arrival in Washington, damage to the limousine was noted.
Charles Taylor Jr., the Secret Service agent who had accompanied Samuel Kinney in driving the vehicle to the White House garage from Andrews Air Force Base, noted in his report that of particular significance, just left to center of the windshield was a small hole from which it appeared that bullet fragments had been removed. Nick Prunspy, a United States Police Park officer, also had an opportunity to take a look at the vehicle while it was in the White House garage. He noted that there was a small hole in the windshield, and based upon his many years of experience as a police officer, he noted that that hole had been caused by a bullet.
Over the ensuing days, the car was scrutinized in the White House garage by a number of people. But one day was different.
If one examines the White House garage logs, it is very interesting that in the late evening of November 24th, 1963, and the entire day of November 25th, 1963, not one person is listed as having come in to the White House garage to have any contact with the limousine.
Rumors circulated at the time always denied that the presidential car was secretly flown from Washington to the Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan, for the removal of its damaged windshield.
It is very clear that the only mode of transportation that could have been used to transport the limousine from Washington, D.C. to the Dearborn plant would have been via airplane.
There are several airports in the Detroit area. It would have been a simple matter to transport the limousine under cover to its final destination, the Ford Motor Company's Rouge plant. The late George Whitaker Sr., seen here with his wife, was a lifetime employee with Ford and held a managerial position at the Rouge plant. He went to work on the morning of November 25th to be confronted by an amazing sight.
He was astonished when he went to the B building where garage existed at that time, and he saw the Kennedy limousine that John F. Kennedy had been murdered in. The interior of the limousine had completely been stripped, and the windshield was not in the limousine. He went to the glass lab where he was in charge of laminating glass, and the glass lab door was locked. He knocked on the door, and it was open, and two of his subordinates were in there with the windshield that had been removed from the vehicle. They were under orders to take that windshield and use it as a template in making a new windshield. But what fascinated him, and which he discussed with his family and no one else until he spoke with me, was that he saw a hole in the windshield.
It was a good, clean bullet hole right straight through in the front. Right. This had a clean, round hole in the front and fragmentized in the front of that.
Mr. Whitaker had 30 years of experience working with glass and had seen many tests performed on glass, including tests performed with firearms. He described that hole as being in the same location that Charles Taylor Jr. of the Secret Service had described the hole in his report. And of course, without knowing that anybody had observed it before then, but he also was absolutely 100%